Take a network break. Happy 2024. Today we're going to look at some of the biggest tech trends and themes from 2023 and discuss how they might develop, advance, or change this year. Topics include AI, of course, the growing tension between open source and for-profit software, quantum computing, space networking, and more. We're sponsored today by Palo Alto Networks. See how ZTNA 2.0, cloud, secure web gateways, and SD-WAN deliver exceptional security and ROI. Palo Alto Networks has produced a virtual event where you can hear how the latest innovations in SASE can help your organization automate costly and complex IT operations with AI-powered digital experience management, connect and secure branch offices and the hybrid workforce with SD-WAN, ZTNA 2.0, and cloud secure web gateways. Go to paloaltonetworks.com/engage/SASE-signature-moment or see the show notes for episode 461 for the link. One more time, that's paloaltonetworks.com/engage/SASE-signature-moment. We are also have a Tech Bite today, also with Palo Alto Networks. We're going to look at Autonomous Digital Experience Management, or ADEM, that provides detailed visibility into end-user device and application performance. We'll talk about how Palo Alto Networks is using AI ops to help IT and help desk teams quickly identify and respond to problems for a distributed workforce.
Now, digital experience monitoring is a pretty cool thing. I'm personally a big fan. I've installed it and used it since 1999. Before it was even a thing, and it didn't work back then. but I think it works now. So it's always interesting to hear what Palo Alto is doing because they've embedded it pretty much inside of their SASE product. So if you're rolling out an SD-WAN and then adding the security, then DEM becomes a really, really useful tool for managing that network, I think.
Yeah, and all those distributed users who are complaining about why the network is slow, then you can actually get some visibility into what's happening and let them know.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing is that when you do SD-WAN, you're doing it over the public WAN, so you're over internet connections of varying quality. Sometimes it's broadband, sometimes it's gigabit. You've got different providers, and there's so much that can go wrong. There's so much uncertainty in that WAN. It's no longer deterministic like it was in the days of dedicated lease circuits with, guaranteed bandwidth and stuff. And having better visibility tools like digital experience monitoring, like synthetic testing, will build up your confidence that you understand what's happening out there and what's really happening in the field, at peak times and in off-peak times, which I think is the difference. Yeah.
But let's leave that for the Tech Bites.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about several themes or ideas or topics that we covered a lot in 2023. The first one is where we see AI going in 2024 or what it means in 2024.
Yeah, I thought what we'd do, Drew and I talked about what to do for this show. There's not a lot of news that happens between mid-December and mid-January. There's been some, of course, but I think what we'll do is push that off to the next show.
Yeah.
And take the time to sort of not to do a retrospective or to do predictions for 2024, but I think there's a number of themes that are happening now that look set to be the things that we'll be discussing for most of 2024. I guess one thing to say is I don't see too much new emerging in 2024, Drew. I don't think that there's a lot of space in the market for something new to come on. There's so much transition and so much change happening out there, both in the technology sphere and in the political sphere, which the two are increasingly related, in my view, that I think, we can predict fairly
confidently,
accurately. Yeah, the topics that we're going to talk about. So AI, I think, is the first one. And in some sense, it's still less than a year old. ChatGPT only was released in February 2023. So, and yet it's all anybody wants to talk about. And the category that AI exists in is not totally new. It's been around for 10 years before that, but ChatGPT sort of did a transition that made everybody want to engage with it. Before that, it was always rather specialized. You'll see there's a definite parallel with quantum computing, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I think the thing that we now know about AI is it's not a new product category in the sense that it's being added to everything. But if you look at it in terms of infrastructure, what we're seeing is all of our existing infrastructure gets things added to it to get AI. So AI gets added to existing databases. AI gets added to documentation. AI gets added to command line interfaces, which we talked about in 2023. Mm-hmm. Existing hardware products like servers and switches and routers get accelerated, AI accelerators added to them, which we saw with Broadcom's ASICs in Q4 last year. They get modified, and advances to existing products create AI infrastructure. So it's not a wipe the floor clean start with, it's not a greenfield. You've got to throw everything out to start with AI, Drew. That's not what we're seeing. Is that fair?
I think it is fair that AI, at least for LLMs, are additive. It's going to sort of enhance or partner with existing applications. Like Word documentation, like a Slack interface, like some kind of text system. It's not going to be, I'm going to buy an AI. It's that AI capabilities are going to be added to what I'm currently using.
One of the questions we haven't addressed is whether AI is worth paying for. So we're seeing a lot of vendors build an open source version of their AI chatbot, their LLM, and then try to say, well, we'll have an advanced version if you pay for it. Now, ChatGPT or OpenAI has been able to turn that into a $1.3 billion revenue business. But now we're seeing Google Bard want to charge money for it. Microsoft wants to charge money for Copilot in coding and things like that. I'm not entirely sure that people in an era of social media where things are expected to be given to them for free, albeit with surveillance or advertising pasted, on board, are people willing to say pony up, $200 a year to get access to an advanced AI LLM chatbot? I'm not sure.
Well, I think enterprise customers are used to paying for software, so I don't know that that's an issue. I think the question is, will the AI add-ons actually deliver value to make it worth that upcharge? Maybe it is worth my time that I don't have to write, standard emails anymore if I can just have an AI do it, or I can get summaries on meetings or whatever. But I think that is the question. Is the value going to be worth paying extra for it? And I don't know that that's proved out yet.
No, I mean, there are definitely use cases for AI. One of the things that I've seen a lot of is people being able to take data from this system and move it into that system. So extract data from a financial report and move it into an Excel spreadsheet. AI can help you to do the reformatting instead of, doing it using code or, Ansible or Python or whatever language you use to do that in. Is that worth paying for? Well, yes, because that replaces a certain amount of work. But there's a whole bunch of work here about, do I have to teach the AI what I want it to do? How does it do that repeatably and in such a way that I can trust that what it's done is accurately correct?
Well, that's the big thing, particularly with LLMs. Can you trust the output? And that also, I think, hasn't been proved out. I think
the reverse case has been certainly proved.
Yeah,
lawyers submitting ChatGPT with false, legal references and so forth, and it's just like
Yeah. So I think, ChatGPT and large language models did dominate the conversation around AI, but LLMs aren't the only kind of AI or machine learning. So I'm hoping that we'll see in 2024 more development around domain-specific AI models for things like security, for networking and network management, for data analytics, that kind of thing, where it's not about having a chat interface. It's about actually looking at a very specific kind of data to extract more information and perhaps some novel inferences from that data.
Yeah, I agree. I think we'll see domain-specific AI come out as useful first before we see general AI become more useful, if that makes sense. You can't just walk up to an AI and say, I've got a cough and a sniffle. What do I have? Because it'll always tell you to instantly go to the emergency room. You're dying of sepsis or something, right? And I think what we need is domain-specific AI to learn lessons and learn how to work with AI before it becomes more widely deployed. And the narrower the domain, the better it is.
Yes. I mean, we know that AI and ML need a lot of data to work on, but it helps if that data is clean and optimized and for a specific use case, very narrow. So I think LLMs may serve as a front end on how you interact with other ML tools. But I think domain-specific AI, we want to see it do things like correlate and contextualize all of the alarms and data that's coming at you from whatever systems you're looking at. Do things like speed up root cause analysis, or even do some predictive analysis like, hey, we think this component's going to fail, or you may need to up the bandwidth you're using at this branch office because we see consumption rising, things like that, where it's working with a narrow set of data. And the issue isn't, can I have a nice conversation with it, but is it actually going to contextualize lots of information that for me as a human is hard to work with?
Yeah, and I think that's something that we saw throughout 2023 when we talked to vendors about their AI in their products, is that it's reading the network and detecting patterns or detecting, able to find, as you say, a root cause or do predictive analysis. So it's read only. If you remember back to intent-based networking about 5 to 8 years ago, when intent-based networking, it started as reading the network and it didn't configure the network. It could tell you, it could read the network configuration and say, this is what it, and then it would give you the configuration. And then at some point, the confidence level in the accuracy of the software then came, we can configure the network in these limited use cases. And now it's much more, expanding the use cases that it can address. I suspect AI will follow a similar path.
Yeah, I think so. People are going to have to build trust in these domain-specific AIs to make sure, am I getting correct information back that I trusted enough to take whatever automated remediations it might suggest that I do? Could I just push a button and have the AI do it? I think we're a ways from that. Although folks like Juniper with Mist, I think, have made advances here, and I expect other vendors in that space to follow along. And I would also note that Juniper is also essentially attaching an LLM to front end Mist so that you can have a more natural language interface with it. But the issue is that they've got the domain specific AI behind it doing the actual work. And that's what you want to focus on.
Oh, they have a significant advantage over their competitors. I hope they can leverage that. They've got 8 years of Mist AI,
something like
way
that,
ahead of everybody else. And I hope that they can take that lead and convert that into business leadership, product leadership as well.
Yeah, and I think so. As consumers of AI, particularly in the enterprise space, I think just like we did with public clouds, IT teams are going to have to understand sort of the benefits and trade-offs, and think about developing policies around what kind of data and how much of it is being consumed by these AI systems. How is that data being transported, ingested, anonymized, protected? How is your data getting poured into a lake with other companies' data, and whether leaks are possible? Are they going to be able to find out things about you using these systems?
Yeah.
I think the other thing you need to think about is how vendors who are taking your data are monetizing the data you are providing them. And are you getting comparable or equitable benefits from the way they are using their data to monetize for themselves?
So all those points are absolutely accurate. The question about data and the data that you're training on, and then where you perform the inference is also a second thing. But one of the challenges we've got is if the vendors are now training on AI corrupted data, I think we're going to see some problems in 2024. So, for example, OpenAI was trained a lot on public data, and a lot of that public data is not necessarily relevant. It may actually be antagonistic. It may be, aligned this way or that way. It reflects divisions in society. It's not fair or balanced or right or accurate or
right.
whatever. And I think one of the interesting things is that we might see what happens with Facebook and Google and AWS have all got their AI, and they're all trained on substantially different data. What we haven't seen is Apple yet release its AI. And Apple, I think, is probably one vendor who's actually got access to the most consumer data that is unadulterated, because they've got access to your devices. And they've been big on trust from right the way back from the very beginning. We're not selling your details. We're not selling you. Mm-hmm. I think Apple's actually got the one data source. So, for example, with resumes, we now have an adversarial situation where people are using AI to generate their resume, and recruiters are now using AI to read resumes and evaluate candidates, right?
Right.
At that point, that's just AI on AI action. And I'm not sure that is actually delivering any value to anybody. And if that happens in consumer, but if it also happens in the technology space where the AI data, the outputs of AI start to get fed into other AI, there's a feedback loop there that may actually be not good. It may actually be like guitar feedback, where it just becomes a squealing in your ears, which is not what you were looking for.
Right. Yeah. I think there are larger conversations about LLMs to be had about what happens when all of the new content being pumped out is being pumped out by AIs that were trained on the original content, and do we start making a copy of a copy of a copy that becomes less useful?
Yeah, that's something that I think everybody's aware of. That that's a
societal problem. It's not an IT problem. I think for IT folks listening to this, when you're evaluating AI based systems, I think focus less on the Chat GPT front end, where I think a lot of vendors are putting the hype around, because for one, those things are good at sounding convincing, but you really want to focus on the domain specific capabilities and shortcomings of what really matters. So like for a security based AI, can it really synthesize thousands of alerts and events triggered by my firewalls, my IPSs, my endpoint agents to tell me which specific laptops got compromised? That's the thing you want to test, not kind of have a nice little conversation with this front end.
I think the other use case that I'd be looking for is when you've been breached in cybersecurity and you have to figure out what happened. I think an AI that can help you do incident response is going to be a big deal, because it can go into all the data and say, oh, here's the initial breach. Maybe you use a different set of tools to find it. And you can tell the AI, or say, okay, this is what we're looking for. Go and find this across my estate. And it can go and look at all of the systems all of the disparate systems that have a cybersecurity set up, and start to do run the incident response for you. I think that's one area which we're going to see a lot more of.
Yeah, particularly as the SEC is now requiring publicly traded companies to announce significant breaches within 4 days of finding out about it. So having automation tools is going to be useful for that.
Yeah. And that SEC has been followed worldwide. So that will eventually flow through to Europe and to public companies more widely, I think, as well.
Well, let's move on. But before we do, I just want to say, if you've got thoughts, feedback, comments, whatever you want to tell us, we're crazy or whatever, you can always hit us up at packetpushers.net/FU. The FUs for follow up. But our next topic is the future of open source. There was a lot of kerfuffle this year about the way for-profit companies are tweaking licenses to make them not traditionally open source anymore. In some ways, they're doing that to protect themselves from other companies who may be a little bit predatory when it comes to open source software. So I think we've got an interesting conversation here.
Yeah, well, I think the two that happened in 2023 was Red Hat, obviously restricted access to its Fedora distribution, and you can now only access Red Hat Linux as a paid-for version, which is, while it may be permitted under the original GPL, it's certainly not in the spirit of. And HashiCorp with its Terraform licensing change this year, where it moved away from a true GPL license to a business license, saying you've got absolute rights to use my product, just don't set yourself up into competition with us. Which is, I think most people would agree that it's a reaction to AWS's OpenSearch, where they forked the Elasticsearch product and basically stole the whole of Elasticsearch's product to make for their own profit. And everybody knows that AWS is very predatory when it comes to this type of operations. And I don't know that this is a threat to open source. I think open source continues as is. What I've always believed, Drew, is that large-scale open source is inherently unwieldy. And somewhere when you're doing really large projects like producing a distribution, you really need a company to do the whole thing. You need hundreds of people doing the whole, the production, the documentation, the quality testing, doing the PR to promote the brand, all that sort of stuff. And I'm not 100% sure, or I can't be 100% convinced that, a pure open source approach to that is sustainable in the modern era of capitalism. It might have been possible 20 years ago when nobody was really looking at technology as a primary. We were always like a cost center over there. Well, open source was fine, we could get away with things. But I just think that it's much different now. So
yeah, I think there's always going to be free riders who exploit free and open source software and give nothing back, and big companies are always going to find loopholes in whatever licensing schemes you come up with if it serves their interest to find those loopholes. So that, I think, has had an impact on open source. I think the other thing is that open source has been in some ways so successful, particularly I guess Linux, that companies have said, oh, this is a model that we can use and exploit, which I think in the early days, there was this feeling around open source that we're a counterweight to corporate software, or a counterweight to being controlled. It's DIY, do it yourself, build it yourself, which is fine in, as you say, small cases. But when you're trying to build a business around it or operate a business using open source software, it can become unwieldy and unfeasible without some kind of corporation providing you updates and patches and fixes and new features and so on, all the things that you need to operate a product.
When you need $100 million to produce a year to produce a distribution, the open source intent sort of falls apart. Now, there are some signs of various people popping up saying we need to change it. But so far, the people that I've seen promoting those movements are not people that I necessarily believe who have our best interests at heart. A lot of those people popping up saying, we need new open source licenses are people who have been able to exploit for their own benefit their position in the open source movement. And so I have some questions around that. And I actually don't think corporations care. I think corporations have been willing to take advantage of open source and to sort of roll with it and been willing to pay for it a little bit because ultimately it worked out pretty well. But if all of the software turns back to closed source, as you said, Drew, they don't have any problem with paying for it and they'll just go back to paying for it. I don't think it matters.
Right. And you pay for it one way or the other, because if the software is free, it's free like a puppy. You still have to upgrade it, maintain it, teach it not to pee in the house. So you're going to pay for it one way or the other. I think what we need to do is detach open source software from the implication that it is like morally superior to commercial software. I respect the tenets of open source. I'm glad that open source projects and communities exist. I think they do serve as a counterweight to the giant tech conglomerates. But we need to recognize that in this current environment, choosing to develop software as open source is a strategy. It's not a moral stance. And so you need to work from the fact that it is a strategy and all the things that come with that.
That's right. When we get to a gentler, more friendly form of capitalism, that might change, Drew. But
Yeah.
honestly, I'm not holding my breath,
No. Yes. So one of the other things we want to talk about are brand vendors in 2024, the big names, Cisco, HPE, Dell, Arista, how they're doing, what we see as their prospects, that kind of thing. And Greg, I think you wanted to start off with looking at Cisco and their current stand, their place in the market these days.
I sort of see Cisco as a bit of a banner, company in this space, because they're a company that's transitioning from what they were, which was selling routers and switches, and then they transitioned into this software, then they transitioned into a full stack, and then they've but they haven't grown a great deal, and it's clear that Cisco is struggling to find its new direction. And I suspect that at the moment, or as I've said, I do believe Cisco is sort of biding its time, and it's working hard on working through its internal process of, it's done some reorganizations. It's converged all of the enterprise products into a single business unit, which is long overdue. It's probably more than 15 years late, because people don't see Cisco as a campus Ethernet, enterprise data center, telco routers, enterprise routers. I think that's all gone. I think the market has changed. So Cisco's sort of following the market and in some cases by quite a bit. And we've seen evidence of that, because Cisco is losing market share to Arista in the networking end market. The data there that we've seen from various analyst firms but where Arista is winning is with off-prem cloud companies. So, the AWSs, the Microsofts and so forth. But what I would also note is that HPE has had a really successful turnaround in the last 2 years. They're building a very strong business overall. They've gone from, losing loads, and after obviously all the divestitures when HPE split and HP went a different way, and then they sold off all of the legacy business units to Micro Focus, which then, of course, failed because all of that was loss-making stuff. I think that HPE's gone on to refocus itself around GreenLake Emerald, so it's skating to where the puck is going. So people are saying, I want to rent my infrastructure. And for people who want that, they're committing to that very strongly. And for people who want to buy it, well, they've still got that. But what I also, part of that, which is specifically networking, which is, this is a network break, is that they built a very strong networking business, right? They built a really strong SD-WAN SASE business when they acquired Silver Peak, and a bunch of other acquisitions over the last 2 years to bring that together. Their data center business is now very much internal with the acquisition of Aruba. Aruba's built up its campus offerings and its branch offerings. So I actually think HPE is moving very much away from selling Cisco products as its networking solution, which it was 4 or 5 years ago, and it's very much doing networking in-house. But it doesn't see itself selling network in competition with Cisco. It sees it selling networking as part of a bundle. So a rack scale architecture, or you buy our hyper-converged infrastructure, GreenLake, Emerald, whatever. And I think that's a turnaround. That's not something that I would have seen, say, 3 or 4 years ago, that HPE would become a strong networking company.
Yeah, it's funny because you said you see HPE being a strong networking company. I was like, really? I don't think so. But yes, they do have Silver Peak SD-WAN. They do have Aruba, so they are in that space. I guess I just wouldn't put them on the same tier as Cisco. Maybe they're definitely a competitor, but not, I think, probably the one that Cisco's worried about.
Yeah. And if Cisco was still the leading company, HPE wouldn't have done that.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
Right?
Back when Cisco was what controlled the networking market, essentially. Yeah. HPE wouldn't have wanted to endanger that relationship.
No, because they made more money out of reselling Cisco to its customers, through its resellers and so forth, and wanted to do that. I would also highlight that Cisco's end-to-end security business is a bit outdated and also very much lagging behind competitors like Palo Alto, Fortinet, and Zscaler. Those products are unified. Cisco's security business is still a bit, you buy this and you buy this, and then you have to put it together yourself. And the acquisitions of Splunk, I don't think that will fix the problem in a year. I think it's still some time away before Cisco's cybersecurity looks like a useful unified offering. You've got to sort of assemble it yourself. And I don't think that works now. I think you have to go to companies like Palo Alto who say, we've got everything. Just pick which one you want, and we have a unified architecture. The software is unified, whereas I think Cisco still looks a bit more like the old model where there's all these business units all competing with each other and dogfighting, and Cisco's got all of these products that overlap, and they haven't yet converged them onto a single strategy. So I don't think Cisco, of course, announced the acquisition of Isovalent and Cilium just before Christmas, on the 21st of December. We'll talk more about that next year. But I think that is also might be a signal that Cisco recognizes its existing multi-cloud networking and its on-prem data center networking isn't meeting customer needs. And containers in particular, its existing container networking probably isn't enough, particularly in the area of, integrating security into meshes, which is where NSX has been spectacularly successful by comparison. And we've also seen multi-cloud networking companies. We've seen, all these other companies out there are taking away pieces of that emerging new wide area networking business. And I think Isovalent is sort of a signal from Cisco that they still haven't got the right product mix together. They're not meeting customers' needs where they are.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think Cisco is not what it once was, but I also just, since we were talking about it, I went and looked up some major companies' annual revenues for 2023. For Cisco, their annual revenue was $57 billion. Compare that to Arista, $6 billion, Juniper Networks, $6 billion, Extreme Networks, $1.3 billion, Palo Alto Networks, $7 billion, HP, $29 billion. Okay, so a little bit bigger there. Dell Technologies, $102 billion, but when you pull out the PC and laptop revenue Dell makes, then the networking servers and storage business for Dell is just $38 billion. So Cisco is still the biggest player on the block in the networking and security space, but I think you are correct in that these upstarts, these other vendors are picking away at its business, and Cisco is essentially managing itself to shrink, managing it shrinking well, but still is beset by any number of competitors who have a little bit more speed and flexibility to take market share.
Yeah. Now you can take Cisco and put it onto other companies as well. So that I'm not picking on Cisco particularly. I'm just choosing Cisco because it's somebody that I study a lot as part of the networking, and follow. You can take Cisco and put it onto VMware, and that's why Broadcom bought it, right? Same thing. Any of the brand vendors, if you take that sort of acquisition and look at their products and say, yeah, they're not quite where the competitors are. And the sheer fact that there's so many other suppliers that are competing against the established players is a signal that that player is not doing as well as it says, and that the market is changing. It's entirely possible that their dominance, they will now become equals with a lot of the companies that they used to be subservient, that were just miners and so forth.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But the fact is Cisco is still, 9 to 10 times bigger than all its major competitors. So they've got a ways to go.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, not going to change any of that, but
we also want to talk about geopolitics and supply chain. This is a topic I think we do cover on Network Break, but we try to come to it, a little obliquely because it is a sensitive issue. But the fact is geopolitics, and we live in a global environment. We have a supply chain that stretches across the globe. We have interdependencies technology-wise that cross political boundaries, and it's just an issue that folks have to deal with.
Yeah, and the supply chain affects us because if you are used to running IT projects and then cutting purchase orders for your equipment at the last possible minute and expecting delivery in 6 weeks, I think that approach is under threat as we go forward, and I'll explain why. I think and this is a generalization from a non-expert, but I do follow a lot of people to try and understand this. So take this as you will, make your own decisions. Mm-hmm. I think we are moving from a global environment where everything used to be multilateral. Everybody was kind of friendly. We've had 30 or 40, depending on how you measure it, really great years where global trade was equal. China would, a lot of manufacturing moved to China. China would make goods ship back. There was no problems with shipping. There was no problems with conflicts. We didn't have any wars. We had minor terrorist incidents, obviously aside from Afghanistan and what happened in Iraq, but they were very, restricted incidents and sets. What we're seeing now is multilateral politics is coming back in a big way. We're seeing China and Russia team up to get very close. We're seeing a lot of Chinese aggression in the Asia Pacific. We're seeing India become a superpower in its region. The USA, of course, remains the dominant geopolitical force. And Europe, of course, is having its own problems with the war in Ukraine. There's terrorism in Israel and Palestine. You've got North Korean aggression. It's starting to do moves on South Korea, which is a terrifying flashpoint because they're both nuclear armed. The net result of all of this is that there's change and weakness in the supply chain. We're seeing companies change their supply chain, moving manufacturing slowly away from China piece by piece, moving it out to other countries, and they have to bed down those processes. That usually leads to quality control problems or disruptions in the supply process. So companies moving manufacturing from China to India or Vietnam or Japan or the Philippines or Indonesia, whatever it is definitely changing. Obviously, TSMC with its manufacturing of leading edge chips. And more recently, we've seen problems in the Panama Canal. I don't know. Have you followed the Panama Canal, Drew?
Well, only since that one ship got stuck, but I haven't kept up with it.
Well, the Panama Canal used to have, I don't know, I can't remember the exact number, but you can go and research it. I think it used to be like 100 ship movements a day or something. And it's now restricted to 30 ship movements a day because there's no water feeding into the lake that they use to flood the locks. And so now you have this situation where all of the shipping that used to go through that canal now has to go the long way around. And now, of course, in the Suez Canal in Egypt, between Egypt and Israel, of course, there's this, massive problems with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict going on there. And we've seen, freighting ships coming through the Suez Canal be attacked by very small groups of well-armed groups. And now all of a sudden you're seeing that people who run shipping companies say, okay, well, we have to sail all the way around Africa. We're not going to take the shortcut. And it's adding 10 weeks onto the journey, assuming that the weather stays good. So basically what this means is that globally, safe and reliable transport that we used to have for global trade is now no longer that. Large items that go by ships, cars, screen TVs, industrial machinery, they're at risk. Chips, smartphone, laptop, server boards, they move by air. But I think the supply chain is going to change the way how we work. It's going to be geopolitical. There's, we don't want to see, the US has made it clear they don't want China to be able to manufacture chips, or, they're going to use that political power to control what an opponent in the geopolitical space is going to do. For example, where do we, how does that affect us? I think it's going to affect our supply chains, and we should be ready for that.
Yeah, so the U.S. is now spending billions of dollars to essentially rehome chip manufacturing, but that to rebuild a sustainable silicon industry in the U.S. could take years and years. There's still a lot of other components that rely on other countries to produce. There's also the question of raw materials, where they're located, and what global entities have control or influence there. So you can't just say, well, we're just going to make all our chips here. It's not possible. I think for our listeners, you should sort of look at geopolitics like weather or climate. It's an externality. You can't control it, but you should be thinking about it in terms of like disaster recovery and business continuity. So for instance, what components do you absolutely couldn't live without? Maybe have some spares on hand just in case. As you mentioned, don't rely on just-in-time delivery anymore. Yeah,
or plan your project to not necessarily have a choke.
right. If you can.
Yeah. Make sure, check into what your delivery timeframes are. It's very frustrating because you can waste a lot of work. I sure understand. But yeah, as you say, moving chip manufacturing away from Taiwan is a huge problem. We talked about it more than once over in 2023, and I think we'll still be talking about it into 2024.
For sure. All right, a quick way to tell you our sponsor, Palo Alto Networks. You can see how ZTNA 2.0, Cloud, Secure Web Gateway, and SD-WAN deliver exceptional security and ROI. 2024 is a year when companies will need to do more with less. As businesses grapple with economic uncertainty, it is more critical than ever to consolidate fragmented security and networking solutions in order to reduce operational complexity and costs. Palo Alto Networks has produced a virtual event so you can learn how the latest innovations in SASE can help your organization. Things like automate costly and complex IT operations with AI-powered digital experience management, connect and secure branch offices and the hybrid workforce with SD-WAN, ZTNA 2.0, and Cloud Secure Web Gateway, and unlock better ROI through consolidation of point solutions with Prisma SASE. Go to paloaltonetworks.com/engage/SASE-signature-moment, or see the show notes for episode 461 for the link. One more time, that's paloaltonetworks.com/engage/SASE-signature-moment to see that virtual event. All right, back to the news, and here we go. We have to talk about SASE, SD-WAN, and SSE. That's been, this emerging category. SASE is essentially cloud-delivered security services that integrate SD-WAN, and they are getting a lot of conversation.
Yeah, so I guess it's a big topic because I think there's so much change going on here where people are moving away from dedicated circuits to this, to be more flexible, get the idea of boostable, flexible bandwidth and all that. I basically see it continuing as is. We've been talking about it now for 5 years. There's a fairly, if you followed us through the discussions with vendors and you listen to what they have to say, to me, it's SD-WAN has a particularly linear path, and it's going to continue. We're going to see more security features fold in. You're going to see AI added to the security so they can detect more threats, more quicker, more better, more visibility, more measurability, more observability. The security functions are going to improve. You're going to see better support for hybrid work. The idea that you're in the office, out of the office, there are people who work from home or from other people's offices. That's all going to be become more seamless and easier to operate. And I think also what we might see is endpoint management fold into SASE SD-WAN. At the moment, that seems to be something different, but I don't see why that should be a different product anymore. I think if you're going to have all of that cloud functionality, all of that software functions, why it won't be long before Palo Alto and Fortinet in particular say, why am I not just, or in Zscaler, by the way, why am I not just adding something to the endpoint management and folding it all into my product? And I think that's not far away. Yeah. Why am I not managing mobile phones, iPads, laptops, desktops, all that sort of stuff? Why not just put all that in there? Why not do it all in the security solution?
Yep. I anticipate that as well. I don't have numbers, but my instinct is that the discussion of SASE is much, much higher than the actual adoption of SASE. So I think we still are in very early days. And if I were a customer, I would approach SASE with caution. I think for vendors building a viable SASE architecture that can do all of this security scanning at peak load while remaining operationally and financially viable, it's a huge software and infrastructure challenge. So I think if you are looking at SASE from a variety of vendors, push them hard on the infrastructure questions, especially if they start to get all hand wavy about, well, it's cloud and it's autoscale, like dig deeper. I think though.
I think what you're saying there is that not all SASE solutions are the same. There's definitely a gap between some basic, I did SD-WAN 2 years ago and now I'm SASE, and companies who've been doing SASE for 5 to 10 years, there's a definite gap. There's a feature set and a functionality capability that some companies have that is far superior.
Well, it's not even that. It's obviously, yes, there's going to be feature set differences, but also just how are they building this cloud-based security architecture so that it can do all of these security features you need at speed accurately? That's a very hard problem, and I'm curious to see if anybody's actually cracked it, especially considering if SASE adoption is not that high right now. What happens if it does ramp up? Have they built the architecture to be able to sustain this, all of the capacity that's going to be coming at them? So I think,
generally, I don't think the actual basics of the networking is a big deal these days. I think it's like armpits. Everybody's got an SD-WAN solution.
Sure.
Yep. And the real value is in the usability. How easy is it for me to put this in front of the help desk? Am I using AI to accelerate my operations capability? Am I, what's my visibility into if some particular branch is having a performance problem? Am I being alerted automatically? Right. That's the state of the art at the moment.
I think so. Yes, that monitoring, that analytic capability, which ties back to our earlier AI conversation. Can you get good information out of it? And even though just one more point, while I think it's good to come to SASE with a skeptical eye, the fact is that the way applications are being delivered and consumed means that the old days of piping everything through your centralized cluster of firewalls is kind of gone. Security is going to get more distributed, which means you have to have an eye toward where it's going to be distributed and how to manage and monitor it all. So keep that in mind. Yep. One thing I want to put on maybe the prediction calendar, our prediction spreadsheet is the potential of somebody like Microsoft or AWS or Google, one of the big cloud providers, actually buying a security vendor and making SASE just one of their cloud offerings.
To some extent, that's been done. They've all introduced the SASE SD-WAN, but it's been more of a Cloudflare model than a traditional infrastructure model targeted at existing, FTSE 2000 type of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So far, they've sort of been targeting then cloud natives rather than the traditional enterprise.
Yes, but there is money there.
Yeah, that would be a thing. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Okay, so the next topic is how to be an employee in 2024 in terms of relationship to your employer.
Yeah, this is a tough one, Drew. I think some of this is going to be not controversial, but maybe it'll be uncomfortable for some people. I think the basic principle of employer loyalty will continue to erode. I think that's one thing. In 2024, that idea that I'm loyal to my employer will be erode even more than it already has. I see the current version of capitalism. My mental model is to call it shareholder capitalism, which puts shareholders and owners before customers and employees. We see that a lot where big companies are all about returning money to shareholders or doing what's right for shareholders, but less about doing what's right for customers. They'll quite happily burn customers if I can get 2 quarters of good results and, make shareholders happy. And that's certainly something that we've seen. That sort of gets to this rather, capitalism, which is really greedy and sort of whatever, which is really what they're doing is focusing on the shareholders. Big companies do this, but I think we're also seeing small companies do this where the owners expect to get huge returns and they will go for short-term returns over long-term returns. I think the shareholder capitalism has come all the way down into small business as well. So what does this mean to you? This means that employees are a consumable that can be squeezed on price, to produce more for less, to be fired at will, to dodge paying for those services wherever you can. You are not a person, you are a human resource, in the same way that a pile of metal or a roll of paper or sheets of paper that go into a printer, that's how people are increasingly being treated. And I think employees have been slow to respond here. They're not understanding what's been happening there. But increasingly, I think people are starting to understand their value in this process and demand to be paid correctly, to be treated well, and become more willing to walk out the door when they're not. And they're thinking of themselves as a supplier. Does that make sense? Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the other effects of the pandemic was people realized like, I do have some value, and suddenly that value, I have some leverage now in this conversation with my employer, people negotiating for higher salaries, better wages, better working conditions. I think that's a good thing. I don't know if it's going to last, but we have had a little bit of that in the past couple of years.
And I also think that, as people understand this, that human skills of empathy, loyalty, reciprocity, being nice to your co-workers, being respectful of your managers, that's all disappearing because it becomes a very transactional relationship. Mm-hmm. And so the secondary effect of that is that soft skills of, working with people is actually no longer a thing because it's so purely transactional. I'm here to do this job to get this money. I won't do anything outside of this model. And companies are now saying, why are workers not working hard? Why are workers not? And that's because that's the environment that's been created. So, employers would rather lose good employees than fix problems inside their business. That is, instead of turning around a bad or a failing product or service, more by the time they have, a competitor has already entered the space and taken the opportunity because the speed of business has accelerated so much. Yeah. So rather than bother to try and fix it or invest in a new, refreshing the product or whatever, they'll just throw away the whole business unit, including all the good employees, right? If there's bad employees, they'll get taken out, but so will the good ones, right? Rather than fix a process, it's easier to throw it away. And I think that's something that it's an extension of what we were talking about before, this sort of transactional work for money. There's no concept of humanity in the whole process. Now turns around and say, well, this isn't working. A competitor's already emptied the market space. Well, we'll just get out of it and go somewhere else, or, double down on the things that are working for us. I also think interest rates and inflation are expected to remain at current levels around 2024. There's the market saying one thing and the Federal Reserve banks of the US, Europe and UK are saying another.
Yes.
But the general consensus that I'm seeing is that the current inflation rates of between 3 to 5% globally are going to stay in place. This means that you should expect to get a pay rise of at least 5% in 2024. If you don't, you should be planning to leave because your employer is effectively decreasing your pay, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a straight up. You should probably expect up to 10% as a cost of living increase, depending on where you live. I also think that the recruitment process remains very messy for both sides. I talked before about, you're using AI to generate a resume, but the recruiters are using AI to evaluate your resume. There's a real breakdown here. But keep in mind that your recruiters are now able to use AI and related technologies to start sniffing around your social media to track your work history. Like, it's not just a case of a recruiter going to LinkedIn and looking at your profile and who you're connected to. They can actually go and start hunting for you on Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat and Instagram and build up a profile of you as a person really, really easily. Where before that would have been something reserved for executives or, high value employees. This is now coming right the way down. Uh-huh. So be aware of that. If you're going to get out there and clean up your social media, if you've got it, sort of thing. Don't be flashing around that you've got extreme views or, whatever. And if you think you're going to work for a company that has non-extreme views or doesn't value those extreme views. Yeah. One bright spot though, Drew, is that I was looking at some economic data and they've pointed out that computer science studies now exceed the total number of students in humanities. So before, like 10 years ago, a lot of students went into humanities and learned how to have empathy and to think about social issues and to think about communication. What's happening now is we've got so many enrollments in computer science. There's probably more people in computer science than, almost any other academic track these days. Mm-hmm. I think there's a couple of things that's interesting out of this is we're going to see a flood of young people coming out with quite good computer skills instead of, people coming on with humanities and soft skills type stuff. I think if I was working at an employer and I have these young people, I'd be a bit nervous because they're going to learn quick and they've got good grounding in computer skills. They could be, they could hasten you out of the workforce if you're not careful. So watch out for that, but also watch out for that. They'll have knowledge and skills that you can harness, right? You could learn things from them. So be aware that if the flood of, new, highly educated in computer science people start taking jobs in your company or alongside of you, sit down and listen to them because they've learned things that you didn't. They come from a different era. Listen to what they have to say. And I think that's really exciting because a fresh era of technologists is good for the business. We don't have enough people applying for computing jobs or technology jobs.
Well, I will say, this is just my own personal observation, but my youngest son is a computer science, computer security major in college. He just finished his first semester freshman year. And we've looked at, sort of the whole program he's going to go through. And I can say that him coming out, he's going to be very comfortable in Python. He's going to be very comfortable with automation. He's going to have a background in a lot of different kinds of technology. So he's going to walk into an organization, I think, with a decent skill set. I think where he's going to be lacking is good communication skills. He's not going to have any experience and he's not going to know how businesses actually operate. So you still got that in your back pocket. If you're one of the graybeards or the older folks in an industry, you've still got some essential experience that these young folks won't have. But I think, Greg, it's great to welcome them with open arms, see what you can learn from them, and be able. And you have stuff you can teach them. So it's not that they're not just here to replace you. It should be a little bit more.
I don't know. A nerd without social skills reminds me of me 35 years ago, possibly even today.
Not the social skills, but just being able to clearly communicate. I know it's still a useful thing, even if it's not Python. Being able to write a clear email or a report still has value out in the world.
That was me. I promise you 30 years ago, that was me. No social skills, no communication skills.
And look where you are now, so, talking for a living.
I would say a lot of people would say you still don't, Greg, but perhaps that, maybe I've gotten a little bit better. Maybe.
Make your own decisions.
Make your own decision.
All right. We also teased quantum, so we do want to talk quickly about the potential of quantum in 2024, where we see that going.
Yeah, I don't think quantum computing is going to be a big deal in 2024. But there definitely are signs that quantum computing and quantum networking are reaching viable product state, and there are markets emerging for them. So there is some early adoption, perhaps. It's worth noting that the first quantum computers were actually sold in 2011. So not exactly a breakthrough, instantly emerged into the market. Mm-hmm. Today we have D-Wave, IBM, Google, and AWS with working quantum computers. And many of the brand vendors are spending money on quantum computing like Microsoft and Intel, right?
Yep.
But here's what I will say about quantum, Drew, is that quantum computing is uniquely suited to breaking cryptography. Right. And I think we will see a massive hype cycle out of the cybersecurity people to say, you've got to rotate all your algorithms and you've got to go to post-quantum cryptography. And I think sometime in this year, there's going to be a sky is falling type discussion.
It's classic security playbook.
Fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Yes.
Sell the fear.
Yes.
So I think generally we are better prepared for this than we were in previous decades, for sure, since we've improved how we update firmware, and the process of rolling over keys and algorithms is much better than where we were. But I do expect a lot of cybersecurity marketing drama to come out of this. So just be aware of that.
Yeah.
But also, there is a lot of interest in specific verticals to use quantum computing. If you go out and spend time reading about quantum computing, which sadly I did, there are people using quantum computing for lots of really, really interesting, but really, really niche things like DNA or antibiotics or stuff like that, right?
Yeah. Life sciences, medical sciences, geophysics, probably.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I think we'll see how it goes. Yeah. I don't think that 2024 is the quantum, unless some sort of massive breakthrough happens and it suddenly becomes quantum on the desktop.
Yeah. I don't have
probably not even.
Yeah, I don't have a big read on quantum computing other than to say that I can see big governments being very interested in developing quantum computing to crack non-quantum encryption. But if everybody gets to quantum, then of course there will be also quantum encryption, which will be back to the same old story. But I think folks like IBM are pushing quantum because they see that as the return to the mainframe business, where they can sell you a complete package of the integrated software, the integrated hardware, and we give you the training so that these high priests can operate the quantum mainframe. So I understand why IBM is getting into it. But again, I don't see it being a significant influence for 2024.
Yeah. Wouldn't have anything to do with the 15 years of investment, R&D investment.
That too. It's going to pay off.
I'd like to get that.
Going to pay off.
But remember that quantum computing still relies on supercooled superconductors, to generate quantum materials. And So it's not exactly
highly specialized.
portable.
Yeah, no.
It's still very,
Yeah.
If we ever come up with a solution for the materials that generate the quantum entangled elements, then it's going to change. But until then, I don't think 2024 is the year of quantum.
Yes. Well, it wouldn't be a network break if we didn't talk a little bit about space networking. So, Greg, I'll let you start.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about direct handsets last year. So this idea of mobile phone to satellite. Just over the Christmas break, Starlink did launch 6 satellites for testing with T-Mobile, but the mobile to satellite service isn't expected to start service until the end of 2024. That might be code for 2025, but it wasn't an Elon promise. It was a SpaceX promise. And generally SpaceX does
need it. Yeah. Right.
If you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. Elon tends to be, let's say, optimistic when he makes a commitment for delivery.
Yes.
In other words, he never ever hits a deadline. When Elon makes a commitment for a deadline, he never ever hits it. Whereas if SpaceX actually says it, then generally there's some degree of truth to that. What I do note is that SpaceX is planning 14 launches per month in 2024. And that is entirely credible considering how many launches. I think they did I should have looked this up, but I believe it was something like 100 launches in 2023. So to get to 150, 140 is entirely possible, considering how successful they've been in 2023. So, but I would note that while SpaceX and Starlink claim to be profitable, most analysis I've seen indicate that they are not. So I suspect that what happens is that Starlink claims it to be profitable for some definition of profitable, like some accounting magic that says that. Until Starship comes online, I don't actually believe that Starlink will be profitable. And there's also many competitors, and there is definitely more room for suppliers in the market. So I think SpaceX and Starlink absolutely competitively so far ahead of everybody else. To an amazing, technology achievement and the sort of successes they have are all set to continue. But I do believe that investors are starting to say it's time to start making a profit. And I think we'll see more of that in 2024. And there might be some changes where Starlink stops being sort of a speculative, ever growing, ever committing to more and more, and much more of a, we need to make money, we need to sell products. So maybe 2024, but maybe not.
Yeah, I think space networking is still in its potential phase because it's in the infrastructure building phase, just the same way as, telcos and service providers had to pull fiber to homes before we could start delivering fiber as a service. We have to get the satellites into space before we can have space networking. So that is happening apace. The cynical side of me wants to say it's just a couple of billionaires doing these vanity projects, but I think it's more than that. There is potential for space networking to get service, particularly to underserved areas, and to potentially become viable competitors to the likes of Verizon and Comcast and the big incumbents on the ground, and I would like to see that happen.
For sure. All right, now final topic is virtual reality, Drew. I wanted to mention this because I think it's going to be a big consumer thing. It's not a IT, it's not a corporate enterprise technology. I think virtual reality is going to be a thing, but I think it's going to be the biggest hype since blockchain. I think it's just going to be all over the mainstream media because it's very consumer friendly, it's very visible. You can make up all sorts of things about virtual reality that, whatever you like, Drew.
Right.
But particularly what's going to happen is all the signs are clear that Apple expects to release its virtual reality headset in March. I've seen various reviews and testing by independent people, like media figures from outside of Apple have been invited into Apple to run test versions. They can't take it off premise, but they can come out and talk about their experience of it, and they've all been very positive. I think Meta is still sulking about its failure to get an early. Remember when Meta released renamed itself from Facebook to
Meta because it wanted to build a metaverse. Yeah, exactly.
And really, people haven't stopped laughing, I think, but to some extent, Meta, of course, continues to spin off the phenomenal amounts of cash from its advertising business. But what I would note is that Qualcomm did release new silicon just before Christmas. Links are in the show notes if you want to go and have a look at it. It does 4.3K per eye resolution and more than 12 concurrent cameras. So Qualcomm has come up with a chip that should enable, in this case, they're in a partnership with Samsung, but I think Meta could probably, start to look at the silicon and have hardware that's probably close to what Apple is doing with its headset. Apple, of course, has got all these custom chipsets and custom operating systems and custom camera software. I think Meta doesn't quite have the same sophistication or software development capabilities that Apple does here. And it is definitely coming from behind, and they made a mistake releasing too early. But I think you'll see a lot of rather vapid hype going on. And I don't know. Are you going to buy one? You going to buy an Apple headset?
God, no, not interested. Which surprises me because as a kid, I would have been like, yeah, cool, virtual reality. I want to be there. But I think device manufacturers are desperate to find a new platform so they can sell you more devices and more software. And I guess if anybody could pull it off, it would be Apple. But I think VR, it just has a couple of things going against it. One is the headsets. When you wear it, you look like a doofus. Your face gets all sweaty. And frankly, I think, humans are instinctually creeped out by not being able to be aware of their surroundings. Like I've used some of those headsets, and when you're in it and it's cool, but you're also like, wait, is there somebody behind me really like right now watching me what I'm doing? Yeah. It's just that sort of, biological instinct to be aware of your surroundings is totally eliminated. And I think that's maybe a bridge too far, but who knows? We'll see. I'm curious to see if Apple can pull it off.
Yeah. Anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. I don't think it has any impact on enterprise IT as such, or cloud computing, or whatever.
So we're not going to be putting on VR goggles and special gloves and going into our configurations virtually to fix them. You don't see that happening?
No. I don't think we'll be doing Ready Player One style.
Yes, the metaverse of the data center.
The data center metaverse, or the operational metaverse. Or I don't think that's going to happen.
Fight off malware like Tron. Maybe that could be cool.
Yeah. But I mean, they are talking like the VR headsets are probably going to be north of $3,000 to $4,000 a piece.
Wow.
So it's definitely, only for the true believers in the first days, I suspect.
Fashion accessory. Yes.
Yeah. So that's my prediction for the hype cycle. But it's not really going to affect enterprise IT. But there you go.
All right. All right. Well, this was a long conversation. Thank you for hanging in. If you're still hanging in, do stick around. We've got a Tech Bytes conversation with Palo Alto Networks. We're going to be talking about autonomous digital experience management. That's coming right up. Today on the Tech Bytes podcast, sponsored by Palo Alto Networks, we look at autonomous digital experience management, or ADEM, which provides detailed visibility into end-user device and application performance. We're going to talk about how Palo Alto Networks uses AI ops to help IT and help desk teams quickly identify and respond to problems for a distributed workforce. Our guest is Dinesh Ranjit. He is Director of Product Management at Palo Alto Networks. Dinesh, welcome to the show. And before we get into the discussion, can you just bring us up to speed on what ADEM is as a product category?
We launched our ADEM, Autonomous Digital Experience Management solution. It primarily stands on two important pillars, right? One is, how do we provide IT teams with end-to-end or holistic visibility, if you would, specifically in a hybrid workforce environment, right, where your users are connecting and accessing applications from, home network, maybe their favorite coffee shops, or a couple of days or 3 days in a week walk into your branch offices.
Yep.
The second major thing is the applications are also in a multi-cloud environment, SaaS apps, private apps in public clouds, or in a physical data center. So how do IT teams have full visibility? And how can we use AI ops to transform IT teams from being reactive to proactive, right? So that was our aim when we started and we built and launched our AI-powered ADEM solution.
Okay, and there's two elements to the solution, I guess. Then there's the client agent, which sits out on an end user's device, and then that's sending information back to a centralized management area where then IT and help desk can get information on, that end user experience.
That's absolutely right, Drew. So I'd actually say we have three vantage points from where we collect telemetry, right? To quickly go over them. One is all of your users' endpoint devices, right? The end user devices, if you would. The second is we are natively integrated with our Prisma SD-WAN, the branch routers. The third, we have a Cloud Probe agent. We are present, our SASE solution is present in 140 cloud locations globally. And we have a cloud agent in these 140 plus locations. And we use these three probes, if you would, to do the monitoring for your business critical applications to collect all of the telemetry, right?
So this is not in-network telemetry. This is out-of-band telemetry. And what I mean by that is a lot of the times people rely on telemetry that is either ejected from the appliance in the form of flow records, or they tap into the network and start collecting, collecting packets off the wire and then feeding them into a flow generator, which then generates flow records or captures all the packets and then looks for insights in the analytics. DEM is much more of an out-of-band. There is a probe, there is an agent somewhere either looking at the data or creating tests, literally running manual tests between two endpoints to get an idea of what's happening in the network.
That is right. What we call as synthetic traffic, if you would, or synthetic tests, where these three probes, the three vantage points I spoke about, will do, again, the periodicity is configurable, but let's say default 5 minutes, a test towards your business critical applications. And it's monitoring, I'm going to say three critical things here. One is end user device performance. Second is the network performance. And third is the application performance. Right. And the reason for synthetic testing is even when somebody's not accessing an application, you still want to continuously measure all of these three things: device performance, network performance, and application performance. So you can start building those baselines. Like you use machine learning to understand what is normal and what patterns change when you have, let's say at load or you're moving and how that latency is, etc. Right.
Yeah, because a synthetic test can go and log into a website, fetch a test image 20 times and then log back out again, right? And you can run that on the weekend as well as you can at peak times on a Friday afternoon or, on a Wednesday, whatever the time is, and actually find out the delta between the two. So how does the server work under load and how does the server work when it's not under load? And that becomes your baseline. So then you know what the deviation is. That's the idea there, isn't it?
And couple that with, I would say also geographies and locations, meaning let's take, application A in Northam, the latency is probably 30 milliseconds. For the same application A, let's say it's distributed, it's a SaaS app. For regions in Asia Pacific, maybe it's 60 milliseconds is normal. So how do you start building that view and then truly tie that back to user experience, right? So that's the aim with what we are trying to build with our AI-powered ADAM solution.
Right. And then what you're doing is adding AI to this tool. Before we talked about using machine learning, before it was statistics and heuristics, and, way back in time, it was just charting it on a chart. This is really the evolution of that product to a much more usable state. I don't want to trivialize this and say like, blah, 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 and increment, but it's now we're bringing AI to the digital experience monitoring world.
Absolutely. So let me kind of touch upon two important things, how AI is useful, right? And at this point, I'll also talk about one of my interactions with our customers who was using this product, right? We talk about digital experience. We talk about, users accessing applications, but there is a notion of also your critical network infrastructure. And one important thing we did was using our ADAM solution, we also monitor critical network infrastructure. Example, your auth servers, right? Auth behavior at a organization level. With this customer, we baselined, imagine auth requests coming into or flowing through our solution, our Prisma SASE solution. How many of those auth requests succeeded? How many of them failed because of a wrong username, wrong password? And third reason being a timeout failure. And imagine we start seeing deviations in timeout failures. Every network will see few auth requests timeout, right? It's normal. Let's say 10 requests in an hour, right? But suddenly I'm seeing hundreds of these auth requests timeout, and I have the hop-by-hop network performance. Now I'm able to literally root cause and tell you if the problem is a network problem or is it a problem with your auth server, or the third thing is it's a change in config, maybe a misconfig of the auth profile causing this auth behavior. Being able to use AI to get to that proactively, it actually stopped a widespread outage for our customer because they quickly knew where the problem was. They went and applied the remediation. Boom, the auth was back on track. Right.
Can you talk about what the AI brought to the table then that, just an engineer looking at all these alerts coming in wouldn't necessarily have been able to do as quickly?
So I'll tell you a great question. Two important three key points, right? One, how do you know how many auth requests timing out in a given time, at a given time of day, in a given region is okay? And we actually have machine learning algorithms trying to understand those baselines, right? And every different count. So I also like to mention ML ops, right? Machine learning at scale, where if you're trying to baseline different kinds of metrics, we are using different machine learning algorithms. So first is being able to detect there is a deviation in behavior, right? That's number one, what we call as anomaly detection. The second piece is correlation. Now I have, let's say, an anomaly detected with auth behavior. I'm looking at network path performance. We talk about latencies, packet loss, jitter, etc. Hop by hop, all the way from a user to the auth server, let's say. I have a lot of telemetry there. Again, I look for anomalies in that path and being able to correlate them and build causation. So what we do is topological correlation and logical correlations to be able to kind of peel out the root cause, if you would. And the last piece about the AI ML here is what I call as automated remediations. Understanding all of this, we actually propose what the next step should be to fix this problem, right? So that kind of completes the story of AI ops and how AI and ML is used for us.
Okay. And I think that correlation part is probably important because if you're dealing with hundreds of alerts, you're sort of like, okay, where do I start? But this correlation capability means, okay, this looks like it's not my auth server, it's a network issue, and it's restricted to people on this segment of a particular network that I should go investigate.
100%. So you already kind of touched upon what I call as impact analysis. Okay, the system is telling me there's a failure here. Like you said, it's not the auth, it's the network, but who is impacted? And that's such a huge thing for network operators or IT teams today, because in general, even if 1% or 5% of these users who are seeing these auth issues end up calling your help desk, how do you quickly tie it back saying that they are impacted by this particular outage or this anomaly that the system has already detected? So all of that correlation that you touched upon also helps quickly tie your help desk tickets, your users calling to complain, back to a known anomaly and then being able to provide them with an ETA, etc. Or also helps you understand the impact or what is the blast radius of this issue. You're telling me there's a problem with my auth server or the network towards the auth server. Is it 50 users, 500 users, 5,000 users? How do you even gauge that? And that's where all of this correlation really makes it useful for the network teams.
Do you have another example you can share?
So imagine similar construct on auth. We baseline pretty much all data flowing through a SASE solution, right? I'll give a few examples of DNS anomalies. How do you differentiate between your DNS server being overloaded versus a DDoS attack happening? Imagine, again, ML at scale to detect those anomalies and then correlate to tell you if it's a DDoS attack versus it's actually your DNS server load is high and it's not able to respond. It's another example and use case that we solve. Third is ISP outages, doing a large-scale cross-correlation for data coming from all users, anonymized, all our ADEM customers in a geolocation who are using the same internet provider. Being able to find internet outages, or more specifically, I would say, degradation of the internet service, right? We all know if internet is not working at home. When I'm at home and I know if internet is completely down, you would know, I would know. But it's when the internet is actually working, but not working well, and my app is timing out, my page is loading slowly. Who do I call? Am I going to call my IT and complain? What can they do about it? Now, imagine this visibility for IT teams and for end users directly. If they come to know that their internet provider is going through a degradation, is of a lot of value to kind of deflect those tickets. So again, all of these use cases powered by AI, cross correlation, large scale correlations, etc.
So really, everything you've talked about here is about this operations, how reducing operations or reducing the cost of operations by finding things like this proactive troubleshooting or early warning or predictive fault monitoring was one that you talked about before. But now what you're suggesting is you've got improved diagnostic tools. So how I can get to the root of a problem faster and prove that it's this, not that. So that's really what, and that's both of those things are operational expense reducing. They reduce the cost of overheads, or fewer people can do more work type of idea.
That is absolutely right. So some of the examples we spoke so far, right, were about proactively detecting issues that is impacting a large number of users, let's say. Now let's flip it a little bit of how we are using AI ML in our ADEM solution to solve a single user calling your help desk and complaining, right? So we built a tool that's called Access Analyzer. And the idea being, let's say this morning I wake up, I was able to access Salesforce last night. This morning I'm not able to, and I'm calling IT and saying, hey, I'm trying to get my work done. I'm part of the sales team. I can't get to Salesforce. It's really a loss of productivity. Now, traditionally, help desk teams that I learn, either they have to switch between multiple tools. One problem, second problem, maybe they don't even have access to enough data. And I've heard from enough of our customers, by the way, that it's always a network problem, right? Check the ticket with the networking team. I've heard this from many of our customers.
Proving that it's not the network, mean time to innocence, that's the key.
You nailed the metric there. So one of the key things we wanted to solve was ambiguity in ticket routing. What we meant by that is we actually built a tool which can perform multi-domain analysis, so imagine this. You simply fire a query, can Dinesh, which is me, access salesforce.com, and we have all the telemetry starting from my MacBook, which I'm using to access Salesforce. What is the health and performance of my MacBook? Or if I'm logged in from home, what is my home Wi-Fi network looking like on my home router? How about my internet provider? Oh, how about Salesforce.com itself? Is there an outage of Salesforce in US West Coast? And last but not least, we couple that with security policy configuration. Now I'm able to holistically tell you if Dinesh is not able to access Salesforce, what is causing this problem, and if help desk is empowered and equipped to be able to take remediations, that's great. If not, we just eliminated ambiguity in ticket routing. Now I know if it's security policy blocking access, boom, the ticket goes to the right team, maybe the security admin. I'll flip one last thing. And I really want, people are going to, everybody's going to relate to this. I'm going to write a policy which says group.sales, application Salesforce allow. Is Dinesh part of the right group this morning? Or is there a breakage between Active Directory and the SASE solution?
Yeah. So I wanted to expand on something here. Now, one of the things here is that this is Palo Alto Networks. And for many people, you are a security company, you do firewalls, you do security, you do SOAR, you do, all that, you do SASE. And now you're saying you're getting into the visibility monitoring. If I was someone who's saying, like, why would I be getting this from Palo Alto Networks? Is there something that you can do by saying, because I'm giving this tool, and if you've got all my other, what's the advantages of buying them all from one vendor instead of saying, I'm going to go and buy, because normally we buy visibility tools separately from our actual infrastructure tools, right? Because we want something that's multi-vendor. Does yours fit into that model?
So first thing I want to kind of start off saying why it should be us is because for folks who are listening to some of our other podcasts, we have embarked down on what I call as a single unified platform story, right? From end to end. It's remote workforce, branch office security, people who have embarked on zero trust network access, etc. The key is two things. One, end-to-end, being a Palo Alto single vendor, and we are seeing a lot of our top customers kind of adopting the strategy. You do not want to, we talked about switching between tools. Carrying context between two different tools is one of the biggest challenges of correlation, root causing, being able to do ML, AI effectively, right? Data is the key. The minute you have two different siloed, discrete vendors who talk two different languages, let me put it that way, right? A policy in vendor, if we mean different a policy in vendor two, being able to do correlations there is hard, right? That's number one problem. Number two problem is, you have to manage yet another piece of software. Example, our solution is natively integrated with the Palo Alto products that you would purchase for your, like I said, VPN replacement project or SWIG proxy use cases or ZTNA use cases, etc. Right? We are natively integrated. For activating ADEM, you're not buying yet another piece of software, and you're not going to, going to go through the life cycle of upgrade, install, etc. It's all delivered to you in the same controller or app management plane that you would use for our Prisma SASE, right? So that's what makes it different, because the time to value of roll out the solution is probably, I would say, 3 clicks, to be honest, right? And we want to get to a single click, but
even using it, because if I've got multiple operators and I've got someone who's doing, say, firewall management and SaaS management, and you've got all of the policies that you're setting up in a zero trust environment, there's value in being in the same console and the same authentication and authorization. If you're in this user group, you can see this configuration of all the tools. And the visibility here, or the digital experience monitoring, should be it's easier if it's part of that, perhaps.
Oh, 100%, right? So it's not just ADEM. When we write security policies, imagine we need device posture. If you have turned off your antivirus software, you don't get access to certain ground jewel or business critical applications. For you to write such a policy now, you need to understand device posture, device ID, etc. With all of that data, you want to troubleshoot with that same interface, a tool that you use to implement your security stack or your access stack. You want the same tool to be able to troubleshoot. You don't want a different vendor, because then, like I said, we're talking different languages. You have to talk about training your help desk and network teams or operators. You're going to encounter, again, the same amount of twice the amount of effort to train them on two different tools. So that's the key, I would think. The value in having this integrated end-to-end single vendor story is so powerful.
Yeah. And is this endpoint client integrated with, if I'm also using Palo Alto for antivirus, anti-malware, remote access, I can also get ADEM capabilities, or is it a separate client?
Oh, it's the same client, no separate client. It's a single client. What you use for remote workforce connectivity, what we call as our mobile users solution for remote workforce connectivity, that same agent sitting on every single end user's laptop has this ADEM agent embedded within it, right? It's all about enabling it. Once enabled, that's it. So you're not installing new software. You're not even certifying a new software, because I'll tell you, certifying anything that goes on endpoints today, every large organization have to certify that software.
Sure.
Right. So all of that is gone. It's a single software that you're certifying and installing. It's all about enabling features at that point.
Okay, that does wrap up our time together. Dinesh, if folks want to try this for themselves or get more information about ADEM, where should they go?
Two imported assets. One is I would recommend paloaltonetworks.com/SASE, and you'll find a lot of content, demo videos and recordings about our ADEM solution. The second is the product has been shipping, and we have an evaluation license available today for you to try out, and I highly encourage you to try the license out.
Got it. Okay. We'll have that link in the show notes. Thanks, Dinesh, for joining us, and thanks to Palo Alto for being a sponsor. Sponsors make everything we do here at Packet Pushers possible. But of course, thank you for being a listener. You are also very important to us. If you like this episode, you can find it and many more fine free technical podcasts and our community blog. It's all at packetpushers.net. You can follow us on LinkedIn. You can hear us on Spotify. You can join our Slack channel if you want to hang out and say hello. And last but not least, you can leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. And as always, remember that too much networking would never be enough.